Chapter 44:19. Hearing this, Muchen didn't know whether he was joking or not. He stared at him coldly and defensively. Hao also stared at the man with a cold face. His childish voice was cold as he asked, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Pan Ning smiled and stopped teasing them. Instead, he poured a glass of wine and took a sip. "Don't worry, I'm not a bad person. I just saw that the three of you didn't have an adult by your side, so I came to take a look out of curiosity." He looked at Hao and said, "You guys sneaked out, right? Don't you know that this is very dangerous? Where are your parents? Or where do you live? I can get someone to help you send a letter and let them take you back." His children were already 4 or 5 years old. If they saw their children sneaking out by themselves, they would probably go crazy. These children's parents were also very careless. "I'm in the Phoenix Dynasty. Can you help us send a letter?" Yu-er's eyes lit up and she asked with a smile. "Phoenix Dynasty?" Pan Ning was slightly surprised and couldn't help but look at the three of them. "As far as I know, there is no such thing as a Phoenix Dynasty on this mainland. You guys didn't remember wrongly, right?" Hao had long known that they were probably not on the same mainland as his parents. After all, there were no cultivators on this mainland. Only mortals were there, so naturally, it was impossible for them to know where the Phoenix Dynasty was. "Waiter, the bill!" Hao shouted. After the waiter came to settle the bill, he carried his siblings down from the chair and held each of them in one hand as they went downstairs. "Goodbye, uncle." Yu-er turned back with a smile and waved at him. Looking at the little girl's likable appearance, Pan Ning smiled and waved back. After watching them leave, he returned to the table and continued to drink with his friends. Hao accompanied Mu Qin and Mu Yu to walk around the city and bought a lot of things. While walking and stopping, Hao couldn't help but look behind him. He kept feeling that someone was following them. "Big brother, what's wrong?" Mu Qin asked, puzzled. He had already turned back several times along the way. "Seems like someone is following us," Hao said, his cold little face tensed up. Hearing this, Yu-er also couldn't help but look behind them. However, other than the people on the street, she didn't see anyone strange or suspicious. "It's getting late. Let's go back to the inn to rest." As Hao spoke, he didn't dare to let them stay outside for too long because he was worried about their safety. He immediately led them to the inn. After they left, the few people who followed them all the way spat on the ground and cursed, "That little bastard is smart." There were a few times when they wanted to make a move, but they didn't have the opportunity to do so. It was as if they knew that they were watching from the shadows. "Big brother, they seem to be heading towards the inn. What should we do?" another person asked. He didn't expect the three children to be so vigilant. "Come here, I'll tell you. Let's do this," the man in the lead said in a low voice. After he finished speaking, he led his people and left quickly in 2 groups. Hao held the 2 little ones' hands and walked all the way to the inn. However, suddenly, a group of beggars surged out of nowhere and actually squeezed towards them, separating the 3 of them in a few moments. "Yu-er. Chen-er. Big brother. Big brother. Go away, don't push me." Chapter 44:20. Big brother. Big brother. Big brother. Yu-er was carried from behind, and a hand covered her mouth, then she ran towards the alley. Yu-er struggled with all her strength, but was unable to struggle free. Until she smelled a strange smell, then a gunny sack wrapped around her and tied her up. She inexplicably knew what that strange smell was. She also heard the people outside say that she was drugged, so she did not dare to speak. She just covered her small mouth and her eyes were red. She wanted to cry but did not dare to. She did not know why she was drugged and did not faint as the people who caught her said, but she knew that if they knew that she did not faint, they would not know how to deal with her. She was very scared, but she thought of what her big brother said. She could not be afraid. When she encountered danger, she had to think of a way to save herself. So, she closed her eyes and recalled what her big brother said to them. After the man who took you ran to a courtyard, he put her on the ground and laughed. How is it? Big brother, my idea is good, right? Look, this little girl is already in our hands. Big brother, I'll contact the people right away and sell her tonight. Another man said and grinned. Thinking of the shining silver, even his footsteps suddenly became light. On the other side, Howler looked at the beggars who were squeezing over. He was so angry that his little face was covered with frost. Seeing his sister being taken away, his eyes were bloodshot and he shouted angrily, "Go away." That voice contained a breath of spiritual power. That shout immediately made those beggars scream and squat down with their hands on their heads. Another man who put Mu Chen in a sack and ran felt pain in his 7 orifices. It seemed that blood was oozing out. He reached out and touched it. His nose and ears were bleeding. He looked back in horror and saw that the little boy who was less than 10 years old had blood-red anger in his eyes. His eyes were surging with killing intent. He was so scared that he trembled. He did not dare to stay for long and quickly carried the little boy who was struggling in the sack and ran into the other side of the alley. "Give my brother back to me!" Howler shouted angrily. He stepped on the beggars who were squatting down with their hands on their heads and quickly chased after them. The people on the street saw this scene and were stunned for a moment. Some of them gasped in disbelief. That is snatching a child on the street? Quick! Hurry up and report it to the authorities. How hateful! A woman angrily pushed the man beside her and urged him to report it to the authorities. Some people frowned and didn't want to meddle in other people's business. After all, no one knew if there was someone behind this. What if they were retaliated against? Some people looked at the beggars who were squatting on the ground and holding their heads. They looked up one after another, but all of them were bleeding from their eyes and noses. It was a horrifying sight. The commotion here quickly attracted the attention of the soldiers. After the soldiers questioned the surrounding people, they quickly joined in the pursuit. On the other side, Howler looked at the 2 alleys and clenched his fists tightly. He chased all the way here, but he didn't know that the enemy was familiar with the nearby alleys. As he chased, that person carried his younger brother and ran off somewhere. "Chen, where are you?" Unable to see the figures of her younger brother and sister, the tears that she had been holding back for a long time finally fell uncontrollably. Chapter 44:21. The sky gradually darkened. Howler was still searching. As for those soldiers, for some reason, they retreated after searching for a while. In a remote courtyard, Mu Chen's hands and feet were tied, and his mouth was stuffed with a ball of cloth, so he could not speak. Lay quietly in the open gunny sack next to him, not daring to move. She knew that her brother was also caught, and that these bad people wanted to catch them and sell them. "Big brother, these 2 children have been caught, and the soldiers outside have also retreated. Should we send them out of the city now?" A man asked, looking at their big brother. "Have you contacted the people over there?" The man looked at them and asked. "Yes, they are already waiting at the usual place. But I don't know if we should send the children out of the cellar this time. Or wait for a few days before sending the others out. Let's get rid of these 2 brats first. Their appearances are too eye-catching. If we leave them here for too long, I'm afraid that something unexpected will happen. Go and prepare immediately. We'll send them away now." "Okay." They quickly arranged and secretly sent them out of the city under the cover of the night. On the other side, Pan Ning, who was slightly drunk with a few friends, was waving goodbye to them when a low-key but luxurious carriage slowly came and stopped in front of him. Just as he was about to get into the carriage, he caught a glimpse of a small figure walking in the night. He raised his eyebrows and looked. Wasn't it one of the 3 children who ate in the restaurant during the day? He suddenly spoke, frowning slightly. The smile on his face disappeared as he looked at the child. The two little guys he had been protecting were gone. With how much he cherished them, he would not let them out of his sight. Go and bring him here. He sat in the carriage, but did not enter it. Instead, he sat outside. Yes. In the shadows, a shadow guard quickly came forward and stood in front of Before he could speak, he saw the child, who had his head lowered, suddenly raise it. His eyes were filled with viciousness, and he was startled for a moment. My master wants you to go over. As the secret guard spoke, he saw the child's guarded expression and added, he's over there. You met him in the afternoon. How followed his hand and saw the elegant man leaning against the carriage, waving at him. After hesitating for a moment, How walked over. Did something happen? Where are your younger siblings? Pan Ning asked directly. Upon hearing this, How gritted his teeth and said, gone. Hearing this, Pan Ning frowned and said to the shadow guard, go and check the whereabouts of the two children. Yes. With that, he left in a flash. Seeing this, How looked at him and asked, who are you? Can you help me find them? Pan Ning smiled and said, my name is Pan Ning, from the imperial capital, the eldest young master of the Pan family. However, you wouldn't know even if I told you. He waved his hand and patted the seat beside him, saying, come up and sit for a while. Tell me, how did you manage to make them disappear? How paused for a moment, walked forward and asked again, can you find them? Pan Ning smiled and said, with my connections, of course, there's no problem. Of course, as long as they are still in the city. Chapter 44-22. After listening to him, Pan Ning shook his head and sighed. I've already warned you. You three children are too eye-catching outside. It's easy to be targeted. As he spoke, he looked at the children's cold faces and said, with your looks, not only will human traffickers target you, even those with dirty intentions will target you. Therefore, you can imagine how dangerous it is for the three of you to be outside. How pursed his lips and didn't speak. He only wanted to know where his brother and sister were now. Seeing him sitting there with his head lowered and lips pursed with self-blame, Pan Ning smiled. Don't worry. We lost them in the evening. We'll find them now. Pan Ning's subordinates were very efficient. In less than an hour, the secret guard had found out who had captured them. He whispered into Pan Ning's ear about the people behind these people and saw Pan Ning's face turn cold. However, before he could speak, he saw the child sitting next to him suddenly leap into the night. He couldn't help but be shocked by the way he moved. This child actually has such skills? He muttered. When he came back to his senses, he saw that Hao had already entered the alley. His face changed and he said, quickly follow him. This child probably heard what you said just now. He quickly got out of the carriage and rushed into the night with the secret guard. That's right. Hao heard what the secret guard said to Pan Ning. He was a cultivator and sat next to Pan Ning. No matter how low the secret guard's voice was, he could still hear it. After learning the location from the secret guard, he quickly went to the alley. He had passed by the alley courtyard that the shadow guard had mentioned several times today, but he didn't know that his younger brother and sister were locked up inside. Thinking of this, his eyes shot out a fierce light like that of a wolf cub. Daring to capture his younger brother and sister, he would definitely not let those people off. When he found the courtyard, he could faintly hear the sound of drinking and having fun inside. He directly lifted his foot and kicked open the courtyard door and walked inside. Who dares to behave atrociously here? The people drinking inside heard the sound and came out to take a look. When they saw that it was the boy from the day, they couldn't help but sneer. Yo! Boy, you're quite capable. You actually found this place. Where are my younger siblings? Hao asked with a cold face. He looked at those people who had captured Mu Chen and Mu Yu today. He couldn't help but feel hatred in his heart and clenched his fists tightly. Seeing that he was alone, they didn't try to hide anything and laughed out loud, those two little things, we sold them so easily. See, we got the money. As they spoke, they patted the money pouches on their waists. Upon hearing this, Hao-er's eyes turned red. Sold? How dare you betray my brother and sister? Where did you sell them? Ha 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 ha, if we don't tell you, what can you do to us? Little brat, hurry up and scram. Otherwise, humph. The leader snorted coldly. If it wasn't for the fact that this brat was too old, he wouldn't have left him here. Damn it. All of you deserve to die. Hao-er's voice turned cold. He loosened his clenched fists and moved his hand. The dagger tied to his leg was in his hand. In the next moment, he leaned forward and attacked the leader. None of the men saw how he made his move. When they came back to their senses, they saw that the leader was already kneeling on the ground with a sharp dagger against his neck. Chapter 44-23. Ah! Don't kill me. With the sharp blade against his neck, he could only feel his skin being cut and blood seeping out. The pain caused him to cry out in alarm. His body stiffened and he didn't dare to move, fearing that the sharp blade against his neck would cut his throat. Speak. Where did you sell them? Hao-er shouted again with a murderous look in his eyes. I sold them. I already transported them to the imperial capital overnight. Ah. Just as he finished speaking, Hao-er slashed the dagger in his hand. At the same time, blood splattered out and that person fell down with a scream. Ah. When the other people saw this scene, they were so shocked that their eyes widened. They rolled and crawled in several directions, trying to escape. However, how could Hao-er, whose murderous intent had been aroused, allow them to escape? Looking at the people fleeing in different directions, he stabbed the dagger into the ground with a cold face. In the next moment, with a move of his hand, a long sword glowing with light appeared in front of him. As he gathered the sword in his hands, it split into 2, then into 4, and attacked in 4 directions. Die. The cold voice carried a terrifying murderous intent. The flying sword flew out with a whoosh and attacked the 4 people at a speed that was too fast for the ears to cover. Whoosh. Ah. The sharp sound of the long sword sliced through the air. With a swoosh, it pierced into the hearts of those people from behind. Sharp and mournful screams came out from their mouths, resounding in the night and spreading out. When Pan Ning and the shadow guards arrived at the courtyard, they were immediately stunned by the scene in the courtyard. The courtyard was covered in blood. One person had already died, and the other people who were preparing to flee were also killed by the flying sword. What shocked them even more was that after killing those people, the flying swords disappeared one by one, leaving only one of them. As for the remaining one, it was the one that had killed the man who was running towards them. The originally sharp and intimidating flying sword was now heading towards them after passing through the man's body. The powerful aura on the blade of the sword had completely stunned them, causing them to be unable to move under the killing intent. They could only stare with wide eyes at the sharp sword that had stopped between their eyebrows. Pan Ning, who had never lost his composure like this, had his mind completely blank at this moment. The only thing in front of him was the sword blade that seemed to have a life of its own. At this moment, he could clearly feel a terrifying pressure. This kind of pressure caused cold sweat to seep out from his forehead, making him unable to move his body. Immortal. These 2 words inexplicably appeared in his mind. Only the legendary immortals could control swords. Only the legendary immortals had this ability. However, what he did not expect was that this immortal was actually a child less than 10 years old. Hao-er, who was furious when he heard that his sister-in-law had been sold, pursed his lips when he saw the 2 of them being shocked by the pressure. He turned his hand and shouted, "Come back." The long sword returned to his side with a whoosh and was then stored in the space. Seeing the long sword disappear into thin air, Pan Ning's heart thumped loudly. He suppressed the shock in his heart and hurriedly asked, Have you found the whereabouts of your brother and sister? Are they here?" Hao-er looked at him with a cold expression on his little face. You'd better not spread what you saw just now. Chapter 44-24. Even the bodyguard, who had undergone strict training, was stunned at this time. When he heard his master's words and saw the child's cold gaze, his heart trembled and he immediately straightened his back. Little master, don't worry, I will keep this a secret. This child, after seeing him kill those people and ride the sword, he no longer dared to treat him as an ordinary child. Even if he had no common sense, he knew that this child was definitely not ordinary. Hao retracted his gaze and looked at Pan Ning. My brother and sister were sold by them and are being sent to the capital. Pan Ning heard this and knew what he meant. If they are going to the capital, I know which way they will take. Let's go after them now. Hao nodded. When he turned around, his footsteps paused and he looked at the courtyard. There are children inside. You stay here and rescue those children and settle them down. Also, clean up this place. Pan Ning looked at the bodyguard and instructed. Yes. The bodyguard responded. After watching them leave, he quickly went inside to search and rescue the children locked in the cellar. It was late at night. At the same time, on the mountain road out of the city, a horse carriage was galloping. The driver was a man and a slightly plump middle-aged man. Inside the carriage, Mu Chen and Mu Yu were tied up. Perhaps they thought that it was just two children, so they did not take any precautions. After all, the two children looked less than 3 years old. What could they do at such a young age? At this time, in the carriage, the two children who were originally closed quietly opened their eyes. Those people used drugs on them, but those drugs did not seem to have any effect on their bodies. However, they pretended to be asleep until now. Brother, let's quietly escape. Yu whispered in his ear. Mu Chen nodded and the two of them looked around, thinking of an idea. After a while, Mu Chen whispered in her ear. Mu Yu listened carefully and nodded. Woo-woo, mother, mother. Mu Yu suddenly started to cry. At this time, Mu Chen also anxiously called out, Sister, sister, what's wrong? The slightly plump middle-aged man driving the carriage outside heard the commotion and frowned. He lifted the curtain and asked, What's wrong with you two? He was puzzled. They were clearly drugged, so how did they wake up so quickly? My stomach hurts. Yu pursed her lips and said with a crying voice. You two are so troublesome. The slightly plump middle-aged man glared at them unhappily and then shouted, Stop by the side and let the two children go to relieve themselves. Come here, I'll help you untie the rope. The middle-aged man said in an unfriendly tone. Yu obediently went over. Looking at the untied rope, she pursed her small mouth and said with a crying tone, It's too dark outside, I don't dare to go alone. Big brother, accompany me. Go, go, go. It's settled while you're at it. I won't stop you on the way anymore. In the middle of the night, the middle-aged man felt that the child would not dare to escape since he was so young. Moreover, they were watching. Thus, he untied the little boy as well. Chapter 44-25. We can't run now. Let's wait until they let down their guard. The two of them squatted in the bushes for a while and obediently walked back. When they got on the carriage, they saw the middle-aged man was about to tie them up again. Yu said, Uncle, can you not tie them up? My hand hurts. She rubbed her small hand. Because children's skin was more tender, there were already several bruises. The middle-aged man thought that these two little rascals would be sold to a rich family. Seeing that they were indeed young, even if he didn't tie them up, they wouldn't be able to escape. Thus, he snorted and said, Be obedient and stay inside. Otherwise, you will suffer. The two children were pushed inside and sat inside the carriage. As the carriage started to move again, the two were also worried that their big brother would be worried if he couldn't find them. But, after all, they were only 2 or 3 years old children. Even if they were smart, facing two adults, even if they had a dagger in their space, they didn't dare to take it out. Big brother, look. Yu took out a pill from her space and smiled like a little fox. Big brother gave this to me. We can use it. Looking at the pill, Mu Chen's eyes flashed. He thought of the medicine that their big brother gave them. It seemed that there was a kind of medicine that could make people unconscious. Thus, his eyes lit up and he took the pill from Yu's hand. Lowering his voice, he said, "Sit down, let me do it." Saying that, he took out a fist-sized luminous pearl from his space. He crushed the pill and smeared it on it. Then, he took it out. "Uncle, I'll give you this pearl. Can you let us go?" Mu Chen said, holding the pearl in both hands and placing it between the two men. In the darkness of the night, a dazzling light suddenly spread out, startling the driver and the chubby middle-aged man. They immediately stopped the carriage and looked back, only to see the child holding a glowing bead and handing it to them for them to see. Hiss. This is a luminous pearl?" The chubby middle-aged man sucked in a breath of cold air and somewhat inconceivably moved forward. "How can there be such a big luminous pearl? Is this really a luminous pearl?" It was also the first time that the driver had seen such a treasure. He couldn't help but move closer to look at it. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that the bead was shining like a bright moon. It was unbelievably beautiful. "This is the first time I've seen such a treasure. How much is it worth?" The man's eyes were filled with greed. He wanted to reach out to touch it, but the middle-aged man slapped his hand away. "This is a priceless treasure. Don't touch it." As the middle-aged man spoke, he took the pearl with both hands and stared at Mu Chen suspiciously. "How did you get such a pearl? Where did you get it?" When the two little brats took it, their clothes were still intact and they didn't have anything valuable on them. Where did they get this treasure from? Hearing this, Mu Chen's eyes narrowed. He pursed his lips and did not speak. He only looked at them and brushed the powder off his hands. Looking at his clapping hands, the middle-aged man was about to say something when he saw the man suddenly fall down. He was shocked and turned around to look at the child. Unexpectedly, what greeted him was a punch from the child. Bang! Mu Chen's clenched little hand condensed a thin trace of spiritual aura. He punched out heavily and directly knocked the man out. Chapter 44-26. Ah! The chubby man cried out in pain as he fell backward and rolled out of the carriage. The luminous pearl in his hand also rolled to the side of the road. Just as he was about to stand up, he felt dizzy and fainted. The two children jumped down from the carriage. Yu quickly picked up the luminous pearl and wiped it clean. Holding it in her arms, she looked up and saw her brother taking out a dagger. She was shocked and asked, "Brother, what are you doing?" "Killing them," Mu Chen said as he stared at the two people on the ground. If he took out the night luminescent pearl, these two people would die. Although he had never killed anyone before, he had seen his big brother do it before. However, when he held the dagger and looked at the people on the ground, he didn't dare to attack. "Brother." Yu hurried to his side and held his hand. "Brother, let's not kill them. We have medicine. If we feed them, they will die." Hearing this, Mu Chen slowly put down the dagger as if he was relieved. He looked at Yu. "Do you have poison?" "Yes." Yu smiled and took out a small medicine bottle from her space. She poured out 2 small pills and stuffed them into the mouths of the two people on the ground. Then, she took out some water and poured it down their throats. "It's done," Yu said as she squatted at the side and watched with wide eyes. She pestered her brother to give her the medicine, but her brother only said that it was poison and that people would die if they ate it. So, she wanted to see what would happen to the people who died after eating it. Seeing his cute little sister squatting beside the two people and watching how they were poisoned to death, Mu Chen's mouth twitched. He only felt that his sister was really careless. "Brother, their nose and eyes are bleeding," Yu said in surprise and quickly backed away. She patted her small chest and said, "It's so scary, so scary." Mu Chen glanced at her and silently looked away. It was late at night, and she was holding the luminous pearl in her arms and looking at the two corpses with blood flowing out of their 7 orifices under the light. It was indeed scary. "Brother, let's go back and look for brother. Big brother couldn't find us, so he must be anxious and crying," Yu said while holding Yi Mingzhu with one hand and holding his hand with the other hand. "Well, let's go back and find big brother." Mu Chen nodded. He also knew that when they disappeared, big brother must be crying. At that moment, he held his sister's hand and walked back the way they came. They had the night luminescent pearls to illuminate the path, and the faint moonlight from the full moon in the sky. They also had 2 companions, so they didn't feel afraid along the way. Or perhaps, the 2 of them were too young and didn't know what fear was. As they walked, they chatted. "Brother, when can we become powerful? If we become powerful, those bad guys won't dare to capture us. If we work hard, we will become very powerful," Mu Chen said. "Then when we grow up, will we become very powerful?" Yu's soft voice resounded in the dim light of night. "Yes. Then when can we find our way home? Will father and mother come to find us? Father and mother don't know we're here. What should we do? We will definitely go home. Father and mother must be looking for us." Chapter 44-27. Because he could not see clearly who it was, Mu Chen put away the night pearl and pulled his sister to hide in the bushes. It was late at night, and he was afraid that they would be caught again. Pan Ning rushed over with Hao on horseback. Knowing that he was anxious, he comforted him. "Don't worry, this is the only way to the capital. They probably won't use such a large number of boats to escort the 2 children, so they will only take this route. The junction of this route is not close, so I guess they haven't reached it yet and will catch up with us." Hao half crouched, his hand holding the reins. He looked ahead worriedly, hoping to see the figures of his brother and sister. However, when the horses galloped past the place where the 2 children were hiding, they did not even notice that there was someone in the bushes. Mu Chen and Mu Yu saw their brother sitting in front of the horse and quickly shouted, Big brother, we are here. Big brother." The horse galloped for dozens of meters and faintly heard voices coming from behind. Hao was startled and turned back abruptly. He saw the 2 children waving their little hands and calling him under the moonlight. "My brother and sister are there. Go back quickly," Hao said in surprise and tightened the reins. Pan Ning also heard the sound behind him, and immediately turned his horse towards them. When he arrived in front of them, the horse stopped, and the child sitting in front of him had already jumped down. "Chen, you, how are you? Are you hurt?" Hao asked nervously and looked them up and down. "Big brother, we are not hurt," the 2 children said in unison. Hao saw that the 2 were dirty but looked at him with bright eyes. He couldn't help but hug them tightly in his arms. "I'm sorry, it's all my fault. I didn't protect you well." Mu Chen clumsily patted his back and said, "Big brother, we are fine. Don't worry." Yes, we are fine. Big brother, don't worry." Yu also copied her brother and patted his back. Pan Ning looked at the 3 children and finally felt relieved. He exhaled softly and looked at the 2 little ones with surprise in his eyes. How did such a small child escape? Moreover, in the face of such a situation, she was still able to calm down and comfort their brother. She was really sensible. "How did you escape? What about the people who captured you?" Pan Ning dismounted and asked. The 2 little ones glanced at him. When they saw him, Mu Chen didn't say anything. Yu smiled and greeted, "Uncle." Looking at the little girl's sweet smile, Pan Ning also smiled, "Yes. Uncle, the bad guys are all dead." She smiled and said, "So we ran away." As for how they died, she did not say. Hearing this, Pan Ning was slightly surprised. He wanted to ask, but he saw the 3 children talking together again, so he gave up. Knowing that their big brother was not an ordinary person, they reckoned that these two little ones were not ordinary either. It's late now, let's go back to the city, Pan Ning said, looking at the three of them. How responded and patted the heads of the two little guys. Chapter 44-28. It was already the second half of the night when they arrived at the city. They stayed in the inn with Pan Ning and took a bath before going to rest. Pan Ning wanted to ask them what they planned to do next, but seeing that it was so late and the three of them were children, he didn't say much and thought that he would ask them tomorrow. The next day, Pan Ning saw the three children come out of the door and walk down at about 7:00 in the morning. Come over and eat something, Pan Ning shouted at them. Hao paused for a moment, then walked over with the two little ones and sat down at the table. Pan Ning scooped a bowl of porridge for each of them and said, "Eat some porridge first. This is chicken soup, the taste is not bad." "Thank you, uncle." Yu thanked him sweetly. Pan Ning smiled and ordered some pastries. After eating another bowl of porridge with them, he asked people to remove the things on the table and asked, "What do you plan to do next?" The two little ones looked at their big brother. In fact, they were preparing to go to the imperial capital to take a look. Perhaps there would be people who knew about cultivation in a place like the imperial capital. Rather than asking the three of them, it was better to say that Pan Ning was also asking how. After all, among the three of them, he was the only one who could make the decision. "We plan to go to the imperial capital," Hao said. Pan Ning smiled and said, "Since that's the case, why don't you come with me? At least we can take care of each other on the way." He smiled and looked at the three of them, saying, "My house is in the imperial capital. I'm very familiar with that place. If you follow me, at least yesterday's incident won't happen again. Moreover, you can also stay in my house when you reach the imperial capital. At least it's much safer than you outside." Pan Ning smiled and said, "I also have a son at home. He's 4 or 5 years old and can accompany you." Hao frowned and asked, "Why do you want to help us?" Pan Ning was stunned by the question, then he smiled and looked at Hao, saying, "It's just a small matter. Don't worry, I don't have any ulterior motives." The two little ones looked at Pan Ning and then looked at their big brother. Although they didn't say anything, one of them looked around and the other looked down. No one knew what he was thinking. "All right, we'll go with you." In the end, Hao agreed. Hearing this, Pan Ning smiled and said, "I still have some things to deal with today. Tomorrow. We'll set off tomorrow. You can have a good rest. If there's anything you want to buy, I'll let the guards accompany you." "Yes." Hao responded and brought his younger brother and sister to the room upstairs. Pan Ning also left the room not long after. In the room, Mu Chen looked at him and asked, "Brother, are we really going with him?" "Yes, it will be better to follow him," Hao said. With a thought, he took out the communication jade and tried to contact his mother. However, the communication jade didn't work at all. "Take out yours and try," Hao gestured. Thus, Mu Chen and Mu Yu also took out their communication jade tablets to try, but there was still no response. It might have been cut off. Chapter 44-29. On the other side, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu arrived at the palace where Sovereign Black Tortoise was. The two of them sat in the palace, drinking tea as they waited for Sovereign Black Tortoise to arrive. Hearing that Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu were here, Sovereign Black Tortoise did not have time to be surprised. He hurried over with his wife and child. Before he entered the palace, laughter rang out. "Ha ha ha, I heard that Sovereign Green Dragon and Ghost Doctor are here. What a surprise." He strode in and cupped his hands in greeting, saying, "This is the first time the two of you have come here. You should stay here for a few more days so that this lord can properly act as a host." Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu stood up and bowed. At the same time, they looked at Madame Black Tortoise and the child in her arms. "Ha ha ha, you've met my wife before. This is my son. I heard that you're here, so I asked my wife to bring my son along, Sovereign Black Tortoise said with a smile. Greetings, Sovereign Green Dragon and Ghost Doctor. The beautiful woman held the child and bowed slightly. Madam, you don't have to be so polite, Fengjiu said as his gaze fell on the child in her arms. This was Hao-er's younger brother. Come, come, come. Sit. Sovereign Black Tortoise invited them to sit. He smiled and said, I heard that the two of you finally got rid of the Demon Lord. Even the Black Lotus of Destruction disappeared from the world. Congratulations. Xianyuan Mose and Feng Jiu couldn't help but look at each other when they heard the congratulatory words. Both of them smiled bitterly. Seeing their strange expressions, Sovereign Black Tortoise was slightly surprised. He asked, What's wrong? From the looks of it, you two don't seem to be very happy. Xianyuan Mose sighed softly and said, Today, we're here to explain something to Sovereign Black Tortoise. Seeing his serious expression, the Black Tortoise Sovereign's heart skipped a beat. He asked, May I know what the Azure Dragon Sovereign is talking about? Not long ago, not long after we returned home, the Devil Cultivators came out to wreak havoc. In the end, even the Devil Lord appeared and fought with us. I think the Black Tortoise Monarch already knew about it. Xianyuan Mose said in a low voice, his gaze landing on him. The Black Tortoise Overlord nodded. I've known about this for a long time. The commotion that day was so great that all parties were alarmed. However, no one knew exactly what happened during that battle. I was seriously injured in that battle. There were countless casualties. Although the Demon Lord died in the end and the Black Lotus of Destruction disappeared with him, there is one thing that the outside world does not know, Xianyuan Mose said slowly. Thinking of the scene that day, his heart was heavy. The Black Tortoise Monarch and his wife looked at each other and did not say anything. However, from their expressions, they could faintly tell that this was not a good thing. In order to take revenge on us, the Devil Lord used his heart's blood to activate the Blood Curse Ancient Array and sent the 3 children away through the Blood Curse Ancient Array. At the same time, he cut off our connection with them. Until now, we still do not know where they are. Fengjiu continued Xianyuan Mose's words. He looked at the Black Tortoise Monarch and his wife and said, Not only are our children missing, even Hao-er is missing with them. What? The Black Tortoise Monarch and his wife exclaimed in shock. They stood up abruptly. You mean, Hao-er's whereabouts are unknown? Yes. Fengjiu replied and looked down. Chapter 44:30. Although the child had not been close to them since he came back, he was still their flesh and blood. He was a child that they had carried for 10 months. Now, he was missing. Why is my child's life so bitter? She hugged the child in her arms and sobbed softly. She thought of the suffering he had experienced when he was young. It had only gotten better in the past few years, but now he was missing again. Her child was not even 10 years old and was wandering outside. What if something happened to him? Thinking of this, her tears fell uncontrollably. Sob, sob. Your Highness, sob, sob. The child in her arms saw his mother crying and also cried. For a moment, the atmosphere in the hall seemed somewhat depressing and sad. I'm sorry. It's my fault. If I hadn't let him stay by our side, this would not have happened, Fengjiu said guiltily. Alas. Monarch Xuanwu sighed and said, Ghost Doctor, you don't have to say these words. All these years, you have treated Hao-er like your own. We also know that. No one feels good when something like this happens. Moreover, your biological child is missing at such a young age. This is what makes people worried. Monarch Xuanwu sighed softly. He looked at Fengjiu, who was dressed in red but did not have much spirit. He knew in his heart that she probably did not have a good time during this period of time. His son was already 8 or 9 years old, but their children were not even 3 years old. They were wandering outside. If something really happened, they would not even have the ability to protect themselves. He did not say anything more. He only said, "You don't have to feel guilty about this. No one wanted such a thing to happen. Right now, it's better to send some people to search." Madame Xuanwu originally still had resentment in her heart. However, when she heard her husband's words and thought of how Fengjiu's children were not even 3 years old and also disappeared, she could not blame her for a moment. Only sympathy was left. Yes, it's better to quickly send some people out to search. 3 children are wandering outside. As parents, how can we be at ease? Madame Xuanwu said as she wiped away her tears. Xianyuan Mose held Fengjiu's hand and said to them, "We have already sent people to secretly search everywhere. We did not reveal it to the public because we were worried that once the news spread, they would be in danger. After all, they had many enemies. Even if a demon lord died, there were still many people who wanted to deal with them. It was just that those people did not have the strength to fight with them." "Then, do you have any way to find them?" Monarch Xuanwu asked. Xianyuan Mose shook his head and said in a deep voice, "The demon lord is very vicious." Upon hearing this, Monarch Xuanwu was stunned and asked, "How do you know that their contract beasts have not woken up?" Xianyuan Mose glanced at Fengjiu, who was narrowing his eyes, and then said to Monarch Xuanwu, "The contract beast in my daughter's body is an ancient 9-tailed spiritual fox. It has the ability to change space. If it wakes up, it will bring them back. Since there is no movement at the moment, we can deduce that their contract beasts have not woken up." Chapter 44-31. Hearing his words, the black tortoise monarch nodded, "I see. In that case, I will also send some people to secretly inquire about their whereabouts. If there is any news about them, I will inform you immediately." "Thank you." Xianyuan Mose cupped his hands in salute. "Since you are here, stay here for a few more days." As he spoke, he remembered that he only saw the 2 of them and did not see anyone following them. He was slightly surprised and asked, "Only the 2 of you came together this time? Your subordinates didn't come?" "No, we arranged for them to search for them. They did not follow us." As Xianyuan Mose spoke, he glanced at Fengjiu beside him and said, "This time, only the 2 of us came out." Seeing this, the black tortoise monarch nodded and said, "Then I will ask someone to prepare a place for you to rest. You have come all the way here. Rest here first." Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu stood up and said, "No, this time we mainly came to tell you about our situation. We will not stay for long." Seeing that they insisted on leaving, the black tortoise monarch did not force them. He said, "All right, I will send you off." As he spoke, he made a gesture of invitation and walked out with them. He personally sent them off before returning. Seeing his wife standing at the entrance of the hall with the child in her arms, he walked over and asked, "Why are you not going back? Husband, do you think our son will come back?" She could not help but ask with worry in her eyes. "Alas, who knows? Now we don't even know where he is. How do we know whether he will come back or not?" The black tortoise monarch sighed softly and his mood was a little heavy. If he had stayed here obediently and not run to the Peach Blossom Cove, he probably would not have met Fengjiu and the others and such a thing would not have happened. She could not help but complain, say, "If he doesn't come back, then." Seeing that she was complaining, the black tortoise monarch shook his head and sighed. "Madam, if it wasn't for Fengjiu who saved our child and taught him carefully, he wouldn't be who he is today. Although our son is only 8 or 9 years old, he has learned different things since he was young. Don't worry. Even if he's wandering outside, he'll definitely be safe and sound. Their children aren't even 3 years old yet. If they're with it'll be fine. If not, I'm afraid." Hearing this, Madame Xuanwu said, "I know, so I didn't blame them just now. After all, no one wants to see such a thing happen." As she spoke, she gently patted her son in her arms and said, "The child is going to sleep. I'll take him to rest first." Looking at his wife leaving with the child in her arms, Monarch Black Tortoise sighed inwardly. In fact, as parents, they also knew that compared to their eldest son, they favored their youngest son more. Firstly, it was because their eldest son had grown up by Fengjiu's side since he was young and was closer to them. In addition, he had a cold personality. Even if he came back to live by their side for a few years, he was still indifferent to them. Naturally, they favored their youngest son more. Now that something had happened to their eldest son, as parents, they did not feel good. They were also worried and could only hope that he could return safely. Chapter 44-32. Alright, let's stay here for the night. Fengjiu rubbed her forehead. Suddenly, her hand paused, as if she had thought of something. Her eyes lit up, and she said, I have an idea. Perhaps we can find out where they are. Hearing this, Xianyuanmo's was slightly surprised, and asked, what idea? Fengjiu revealed a smile, and said, Mo Chen's master, Tian Jizi. Hearing this, Xianyuanmo's knew what she meant, and asked, you mean, we should go find Tian Jizi and ask him to point out the children's whereabouts for us? That's right. Fengjiu nodded, and said, instead of searching aimlessly in this vast sea of people, why don't we go find Tian Jizi? Even if he can't directly calculate the location of the 3 children in the heaven realm, he can at least point us in a direction. This way, it should be twice the result with half the effort. Fengjiu continued, when Mo Chen went down the mountain to look for the Star of the Phoenix, it was also because of his master's guidance. Since this is the case, why don't we give it a try? If that's the case, then let's go tomorrow. Xianyuanmo said as he held her in his arms and entered the inn first. They went to the first floor and sat down by the window, and he said, but today, you have to eat something good. You haven't eaten much recently, and you don't look very energetic. Yes, I will. Fengjiu said. Thinking that they would soon have clues about the children, her mood gradually improved. Thus, Xianyuanmo ordered a bowl of ginseng chicken soup, and a few dishes and rice that she liked to eat, and said, drink a bowl of soup first, then eat. After eating, we'll go out for a walk to digest the food, and then come back to rest. Okay. Fengjiu answered, and drank a bowl of soup first, then began to eat. The 2 of them finished their meal in the inn and paid for their room and meal. Then, they went out for a stroll in the streets. The Black Tortoise Palace was located in mid-air above the Black Tortoise continent, deep within the clouds. Ordinary people could not go there, so it was relatively safe. After they left there, they casually came to the town below. Now, looking at the prosperity of the city, the 2 of them felt that this area was not bad under the rule of the Black Tortoise sovereign. At least from the looks of it, the people here seemed to be living quite well. I've heard from Du Fan that the Black Tortoise continent is well managed. Now it seems that it's true. Fengjiu said as he walked slowly with Xianyuanmo beside him. There are conflicts everywhere. We can only see the surface. However, compared to other places, this city is quite prosperous. Xianyuanmo said slowly. The 2 of them chatted as they walked, and they were already used to the stunned gazes of the people around them. Therefore, they did not pay much attention to the gazes that fell on them. However, among those gazes, there were a few that were faintly looking at Fengjiu with a predatory gaze. As soon as that gaze landed on her, it wasn't just her, but Xianyuanmo also sensed it right away. With the strength of the 2 of them, the gazes of those people could not hide from their keen senses. Fengjiu did not pay attention to them, but Xianyuanmo glanced at them indifferently. Those gazes were from a few men in brocade clothes on the 2nd floor of a nearby restaurant. He only glanced at them coldly, then retracted his gaze. However, those men who were staring at Fengjiu suddenly screamed and held their heads with both hands. Hiss. Ah. Chapter 44-33. Oh no. It's a divine sense attack. A middle-aged man's expression changed, and he hurriedly helped up a man in embroidered robes who had fallen to the ground. Young master. Young master. Quick, quickly help the young master back. The second floor of the restaurant was in a mess. Everyone gathered around and whispered. They only knew that the young masters of several families in the city were carried back together, but they did not know what had happened. Fengjiu did not even look at the scene in the restaurant. She walked with Xianyuan Mose, and the two of them strolled around the city. In the evening, the two of them were ready to go to the inn, but at this time, they were surrounded by hundreds of people. Elder, it's these two people. Yes, family head, it's them. It's this man who used his divine sense to hurt the young master. Several clans surrounded Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu. They couldn't help but rage when they thought about how their sons had been injured by the divine sense and couldn't recover and advance in a short period of time. Who are you? Why did you hurt my son? A family head shouted angrily. He released his pressure and glared at the indifferent two people in front of him. It was undeniable that the appearances of these two people were extremely outstanding. Even if he had seen all kinds of people, he still couldn't help but secretly praise them. However, these two people shouldn't have hurt his son. This was truly intolerable. Who are you? Tell us your names. Another elder shouted angrily. How dare you hurt the young masters of our families? I think you don't want to live anymore. Who sent you here? What are you trying to do by hurting the young masters of our families? Shouts rang out one after another, and the surrounding people couldn't help but retreat. Only the hundreds of people brought by these few clans were left on the large street. You want to know who we are? Fengjiu glanced at them, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. If I tell you, I'm afraid your legs will go weak. What an arrogant and ignorant woman. An elder shouted, in this city, our families are the most respected. If you want to behave atrociously, you should ask around and see if our families are easy to mess with. What's the point of talking so much nonsense with them? This woman has a demonic face that can bring calamity to a country and its people. She will be a scourge if we keep her alive. Why don't we just kill her? Another middle-aged man said as he stared at Fengjiu with a murderous look. That's right. Let's kill them. Another person agreed. A thin elder stared at Fengjiu, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. He said, it's too easy to kill her. Why don't we kill the man beside her? As for the woman, I'll bring her back to test. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu listened to them talking. Some said to kill her, some said to bring her back to test medicine, and some even said she was a disaster. Xianyuan Mose's face gradually turned cold, and a trace of killing intent flashed in his deep black eyes. However, these people did not know. Fengjiu smiled. She sneered in her heart at their comments. Her cold gaze swept across their mouths as she said to Xianyuan Mose beside her, you're right. No matter where you are, there will always be disputes. Especially those things that can't see the light of day, they can't be avoided. Chapter 44-34. Fengjiu smiled and said, why would we need you to deal with these people? However, do you believe that even if we say our names, they won't believe us? Hearing this, Xianyuan Mose's expression changed slightly. He looked at her and the corners of his lips curled up slightly, but he didn't say anything. She smiled and her eyes glowed. Her gaze fell on the leaders of the group. She imitated them and raised her chin arrogantly. She asked, do you know who we are? Hearing this, those people were slightly startled. They couldn't help but look at each other. One of them narrowed his eyes and asked, who are you? I am the ghost Dr. Fengjiu, and he is my husband, Xianyuan Mose. Sure enough, the moment her voice fell, the surroundings fell silent. Then, a burst of laughter erupted. Ha 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 ha. She actually said that she is the ghost Dr. Fengjiu? Ha 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 ha, what a joke, what a joke. She actually dares to impersonate the ghost Dr. Fengjiu? She even said that the person beside her is Xianyuan Mose? Does she know that Xianyuan Mose is the Azure Dragon Sovereign, and that ghost Dr. Fengjiu is the Star of the Phoenix? They have always appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Even if they go out, they will bring their subordinates with them. Look at them, there are only 2 of them. They don't even have anyone following them. How dare they impersonate the ghost Dr. Fengjiu and the Azure Dragon Sovereign? How audacious. What a joke. I think they are tired of living. Seeing their reactions, Fengjiu seemed to have expected it. The smile on her lips deepened. She said to Xianyuan Mose beside her, "How is it? Isn't it? Even if I say it, these people won't believe that you and I are real. It seems that your mood has improved." Xianyuan Mose said slowly, and the coldness on her face dissipated a little. Thinking of the decision to find Tian Jizi, she felt that even if she couldn't specify a place, it would save a lot of time. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before she could find the children. Therefore, her mood gradually recovered. Coupled with the appearance of these people, she seemed to have regained her usual vigor. Since that was the case, let her play. It's been a long time since I've exercised my limbs. Since they've delivered themselves to my doorstep, I might as well use them as practice. Fengjiu took a step forward from his side, flexing his wrists. His gaze fell on the leaders of the group, and he said slowly, "It seems that the aristocratic families in this city don't have much of a reputation. If that's the case, I don't mind crippling a few of them." What arrogance! A family head's face darkened. Being provoked like this, he was furious. The spiritual energy in his body surged, and he immediately stepped forward. "I'd like to see what kind of ability you have." At this time, because Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose's strength was restrained, they didn't know how strong they were. Until Fengjiu made a move. Crack. The sound of bones breaking resounded, shocking everyone who was watching. They all thought that the patriarch had sent her flying with a single palm strike, but they didn't expect that the woman in red would dodge to the side and grab the patriarch's wrist with one hand. At the same time, she twisted downwards, and the bones in his hand instantly broke. Ah! A painful cry mixed with disbelief rang out. The family head tried to withdraw his hand, but his knee was kicked heavily, and he immediately knelt down. Family head. Family head. Chapter 44-35. Everyone's eyes widened when they saw this scene. At this moment, no one dared to step forward. Fengjiu glanced at those people indifferently. With a wave of his hand, he crippled the cultivation of the family head who was kneeling in front of him. In an instant, a blood-curdling scream rang out, causing everyone to gasp in shock. She, how dare she? The elders of the other family stared at the woman in red in disbelief. She clearly did not look very powerful, but the combat power she displayed was so shocking. Even the family head's cultivation was crippled by her in an instant. This was too terrifying. When the leaders of the other clans saw this, they wanted to retreat. However, as soon as they moved, the indifferent voice rang out. "Do you think you can still escape unscathed?" The indifferent voice was filled with pressure, causing them to freeze in place. Their originally retreating steps also stopped. They wanted to retreat but did not dare to. It was a kind of pressure that reached straight to their souls. It was as if Mount Tai was pressing down on them. They only felt the air become oppressive, and even breathing became difficult. Under that pressure, their legs gave way, and they knelt down with a plop. "Ah! Ghost Doctor, please spare us." "Yes, we were blind." "Ghost Doctor, please spare us." If it was said that they didn't believe the woman in red's identity as the Ghost Doctor, then at this moment, they didn't doubt it at all. Because, besides the legendary ghost Dr. Fengjiu, who would dare to be so arrogant and powerful? However, no matter how much they begged for mercy, the red-clothed woman just calmly looked at them. Her cold gaze caused them to not dare to look straight at her. However, to have them cripple their own cultivation to save their own lives, they could not bring themselves to do it. An elder who had rushed over after hearing the news arrived. When he saw Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu, his eyes narrowed. "Azure Dragon Sovereign, Ghost Doctor." He immediately stepped forward and bowed. Greetings, Azure Dragon Sovereign, Ghost Doctor." Cold sweat seeped out of his forehead, and his face turned pale. And who are you? Fengjiu glanced indifferently, and his gaze landed on the elder. Replying to the ghost doctor, this old man is a member of the Wu clan. Because I knew that my subordinates had caused trouble, I specially came to take a look. I didn't think that I would have offended the ghost doctor. I ask for your forgiveness. The old man hurriedly said, half bowing, not daring to stand up straight. Hearing this, Feng Jiu smirked. If that's the case, then cripple their cultivations. I will not pursue this matter. Hearing this, the elder hurriedly replied, yes, yes. Thank you, ghost doctor, for your mercy. He immediately turned to look at the leaders of the various families, and shouted, Ghost doctor, you blind idiots. Today, ghost doctor, you'd better get the hell over here. However, none of them dared to step forward. At this moment, they were all kneeling on the ground. They did not even have the strength to stand up. Their faces were ashen, and their lips trembled. They could not even beg for mercy. The old man grunted coldly when he saw this, and then his figure flashed and personally crippled the cultivations of the few people in the lead. When he turned around with the intention of apologizing to the Azure Dragon Sovereign and the Ghost Doctor, the two of them had already vanished without a trace. Chapter 44-36. A few days later, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu finally arrived at the peak of Tianshan Mountain. When he came here again, it was still the same snow-white scenery. He walked slowly towards the place in his memory. He saw that on the mountain peak, the white-haired old man in white seemed to have merged into one with the world of ice and snow. If one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't be able to tell that there was a person sitting there. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu stopped 1 meter in front of him. As he was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, they did not disturb him. They just stood there quietly and waited. Time passed little by little. A gentle breeze blew by and traces of coolness entered their bodies. After an unknown amount of time, fine snowflakes floated down from the mountain peak. The snowflakes were like goose feathers. Their heads and clothes were gradually stained with snow. However, the two of them continued to stand there. They didn't move or speak. They only looked at the sky filled with white snow. No one knew what they were thinking. The old man who was sitting with his back facing them did not seem to know that the two of them were sitting quietly behind him. After a long time, he sighed softly. I am an outsider. I can't help you with anything. You should leave. Hearing this, the two of them were slightly moved. Xianyuan Mose did not speak. Instead, it was Fengjiu who asked, Senior, do you know why we are here? As the saying goes, one does not visit a temple without a cause. Although I am an outsider, I can see the big picture of the world clearly. I can vaguely guess the purpose of your trip. As he spoke, he stood up and gently brushed away the snowflakes on his body. He looked at the two people in front of him and asked, You've been standing here for so long, looking at this vast expanse of whiteness. What do you think? Fengjiu's gaze fell on his face. He said slowly, It is lonely at the top. Xianyuan Mose still did not speak. He just looked at the snowflakes floating in the sky. Yes. It's lonely at the top. Right now, the two of you are the lords of heaven and earth. You are incomparably noble and have the strength to cover the sky with one hand. However, I want to ask the two of you, can the two of you stop the snow from falling? He stroked his beard and looked at the falling snow in the sky as he asked the two of them with a smile. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu were silent. They lowered their eyes and watched as the snowflakes fell to the ground and melted with the snow on the ground. This is the heavenly Tao, the mandate of heaven. Even if your cultivation has reached the peak, there are many things that you can't change with your strength. Stroking his beard, he looked at the sky and said, There are 9 heavens, but we are not above the 9 heavens. No matter how strong you are, you cannot defy the heavens. Hearing his words, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu's hearts skipped a beat. They were a little confused. Feng Jiu paused for a moment. She didn't ask what he meant. She also did not ask about the purpose of this visit. She faintly felt that there was a deeper meaning to Tianji's words. However, she did not want to know at this time. Therefore, she opened her mouth and asked, "Senior, has Mo Chen returned?" Hearing this, Tianji smiled and said, "He has returned." "Is he well? Can we see him?" Feng Jiu asked. Tianji shook his head. "The entanglement between him and the two of you is already over. There is no point in seeing him. Moreover, even if you want to see him now, you can't." Chapter 44-37. Hearing this, Feng Jiu said apologetically, "It's all because of us that he ended up like this." Tianji shook his head again and smiled. "No, it's the will of the heavens that should be like this. It's his destiny to experience this death tribulation. What's more, this life and death tribulation is also a great secret to him. Not everyone can cultivate the initial stage of immortal body. This is also his blessing. Senior." Xianyuan Mose opened his mouth and looked at Tianji. "Senior, you can pry into the secrets of the heavens. Please give us some pointers. Where is our child now? Is he in danger? Where can we find him and bring him back?" Tianji smiled and shook his head again. "I just said that there are some things that you can't stop. This is the will of the heavens. With your strength, even if you find him, what can you do? The tribulation that they have to go through, the pain that they have to suffer, they have to suffer. As the saying goes, if it's a blessing, it's not a disaster. If it's a disaster, it can't be avoided. Why insist on forcing it?" Hearing this, the two could not help but fall silent. Did this mean that they did not have to look for him? How could it be? Those were their children. They were still so young. How could they not look for him? Feng Jiu paused for a moment, looked at him, and asked, "Senior, the black lotus of destruction disappeared with the death of the demon lord. Has it also been destroyed between heaven and earth?" Tianji stroked his beard and smiled. "The black lotus of destruction disappeared. Have you seen its seed?" Feng Jiu's heart skipped a beat. He had a bad premonition. "What do you mean?" "That's an ancient object. Even if the black lotus flower is destroyed, it will eventually return to become a lotus seed. How can an ancient object be destroyed so easily? Not seeing the lotus seed does not mean that the black lotus of destruction no longer exists in this world," Tianji said slowly. Looking at their sudden change of expression, he smiled. "However, you don't have to worry. From a lotus seed to a lotus flower, it's not a day's work. What's more, the black lotus was destroyed under such circumstances. Perhaps, for hundreds of years, or even thousands of years, the black lotus will not appear in the world. It's just that." He paused, looked at the two, and said, "The heavenly Tao is the most changeable. Who can be sure? I can only say that everything is predestined." Xianyuan Mose and Feng Jiu realized that they had come with hope and expectation, but after listening to his words, they felt their hearts grow heavier. Tianji's words had a hidden meaning, but he didn't explain it clearly. It really made them feel uneasy, but they didn't have any clue. "Senior, it's not that the mandate of heaven can't be violated, and it's not that the heavenly Tao can't be changed. Now, we just want to know where our child is. Is it possible that you are in danger?" Xianyuan Mose asked in a low voice. He looked at Tianji with his deep eyes, wanting to get an answer. Seeing this, Tianji smiled. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked into the distance. He said, "Every night, I observe the stars. I can see the changes in the fate stars and the general trend of the world. They were originally people without fate stars and were not accepted by the heavens. However, when they were born, a strange phenomenon appeared in the heavens and they received the blessings of the 8 monarchs. Not long ago, 2 fate stars lit up in the sea of stars." Chapter 44-38. Hearing this, Xianyuanmos and Fengjiu looked at each other and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, turning misfortune into blessing was a good thing. It's just that if you want to find them, it will be difficult. Tianjizi looked at the two and said, the ancient blood incantation formation is no small matter. It's not something that can be broken through in a day. Moreover, this should be their calamity. Even if you want to protect them, you can't. But they are so young. Are we just going to do nothing? Fengjiu couldn't help but say. Tianjizi smiled and said, no, you are deeply related. After this parting, it won't be too long. Moreover, since you can find me here, I will naturally point out a way for you. Hearing this, Fengjiu was delighted and said, Senior, please enlighten us. Then I will use your fingertips as a guide. Tianjizi said and motioned for the two to reach out their hands. Seeing this, Xianyuanmos and Fengjiu immediately reached out their hands. With a wave of his hand, their fingertips were stung and a drop of blood seeped out. Tianjizi's hands formed a blood incantation formation and an ancient formation was formed under their feet. In the next moment, the formation flashed and turned into a drop of blood that flew into the sky. After a moment, the drop of blood fell down and disappeared. Tianjizi watched quietly until the drop of blood disappeared. Then he looked at the two and said, see? With the blood as a guide, no matter how I tell you the exact location, I can only narrow the scope of your search. He paused and said, your children are now in the southeast of the lower realm. Follow this clue and find them. Hearing this, the two immediately cupped their hands and bowed, thank you for your guidance, Senior. Tianjizi looked at the two and saw the joy on their faces. He paused for a moment and asked, your current strength is at the peak of the Divine King realm, right? The two were slightly surprised and looked at him, not understanding the meaning of his words. Tianjizi smiled and said, above the Divine King is the Supreme Being. This old man is looking forward to the time when you all reach the peak of the Supreme Being level. Xianyuanmos and Fengjiu looked at each other. They felt that his words today had a deeper meaning, and this deeper meaning was worth exploring. Thus, Xianyuanmos looked at him and said bluntly, Senior's words today seem to have a hidden meaning. Why don't you say it clearly? Tianjizi shook his head. It's not time yet. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed. Seeing this, they didn't ask any further. Instead, they cupped their hands and said, since that's the case, then we'll take our leave first. When we find a few children and return in the future, we'll bring them here to thank Senior. Go. Tianjizi looked at the two of them and said, remember, let nature take its course. Everything has its own destiny. Goodbye. The two of them cupped their hands again and said. Then, they gathered their energy and flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the sky. Watching them leave, Tianjizi stroked his beard and murmured, the phoenix star has appeared, and the deviant soul has entered the world. Breaking the 8 extremes of the heavenly way, you will become the master of the world. Fengjiu, you won't stop here. At this time, after Xianyuanmos and Fengjiu left, they went straight back to the Feng residence. They planned to inform their family members and plan a place to search. After all, after the incident, they had not personally returned to the Feng residence to explain. Their family members must be very worried. Chapter 44-39. Grandfather. Fengjiu called out and walked towards him. It's the two of you? Why didn't you say anything when you came back? Feng Sanyuan calmed down. Seeing that it was the two of them, he asked anxiously, is there news of the 3 children? Xianyuanmos and Fengjiu looked at each other and said, we came here this time to tell you about the situation. We have some clues, but we haven't found them yet. Where did you come from? Feng Sanyuan asked, his gaze falling on them. Father, they just came back. Let them rest first. Feng Shao walked over from behind and said to Xianyuanmos and Fengjiu, your grandfather is also worried about the children, but since you're here, let's rest first. I see that you're travel-worn. You must be exhausted. The children's whereabouts were unknown. In terms of worry, it was likely that the two of them were the most worried. Look, it had only been a few days, but they looked a lot more haggard. Hearing this, Feng Sanyuan also came back to his senses. Seeing that the two of them were indeed travel-worn, and their expressions were somewhat tired, he hurriedly said, Right, if you're tired, then rest first. Fengjiu smiled slightly and said, We're fine. Actually, we went to Tianji to ask him for guidance. Although we haven't found the children yet, we more or less have some clues. To prevent them from worrying, Fengjiu said, according to Tianji, even if the children are wandering outside, they will be able to turn misfortune into blessing. Grandfather and father, don't worry too much. We will go and look for them. If we find them, we will bring them back. She briefly explained the matter to them, and they arranged for her to rest first. Returning to the familiar courtyard, when only the two of them were left, Fengjiu looked at Xianyuan Mose and said, Say, what do you think Tianji meant by those words? Xianyuan Mose shook his head and said in a deep voice, I can't guess what he meant, but since he didn't say it, let's pretend that we don't know. For now, let's find our children first. As for other things, we will know in the future. She reached out and hugged his waist, leaned her head on his shoulder, and said softly, I hope it's as he said, the children will be able to turn misfortune into blessing. They will. Xianyuan Mose hugged her and looked at the sky. On the other side, Hao, Chen, and Yu, followed Pan Ning to the imperial capital. Looking at the bustling imperial capital, as well as the officers and soldiers guarding the city gate, the three children leaned on the window of the carriage to look, and their eyes flashed. Pan Ning looked at the three of them and said with a smile, I'll take you to the mansion first. You must be tired from the journey. Rest well today. If you want to go out and play tomorrow, I'll have someone accompany you. Is there a lot of people in your family? Hao asked. He looked at him and said, If we go like this, will we cause trouble for you? Chapter 44-40. The two little ones were a little confused, so they looked at their elder brother. Hao didn't say anything after hearing what he said. He thought that since he was unfamiliar with this place, he might as well stay at his family's place for the time being. If their family was all right, then he would stay for the time being. If he left in the future, he could take out one or two things from his space to thank them. If they didn't live well, if their family was too complicated, then he would take his younger brother and sister out to find a place to live, and at the same time inquire about information and practice. But before that, the things in the space couldn't be shown to others. After all, every one of his mother's things were very precious, especially to mortals. They were not ordinary things. Pan Ning didn't know that at such a young age, after hearing his words, his mind had already spun a few rounds. Seeing that he was sitting quietly and didn't speak, he also smiled and lifted the curtain to look at the bustling street outside. Returning to a familiar place, his mood also soared. That brat of his family, he didn't know whether he was mischievous again after he left for so many days. On the way, Pan Ning introduced the place and area to the three of them, as well as some rules in the city. After that, he looked at the three children and said, At the foot of the imperial city, there is one thing you must remember. The three of them looked at him, waiting for his next words. Most of the people living in the imperial city are high officials and nobles. Moreover, at the foot of the imperial city, the patrols and guards are strict. If someone dies, they will be strictly investigated and dealt with. You must remember this point. When he said this, he looked at the three children. No one knew better than him how different these three seemingly harmless children were. Not to mention the elder one, just the twins, who were not even 3 years old, were able to escape from the hands of the human traffickers and even knew how to silence them. One could tell how different they were. Not to mention how, who killed more than 10 people at the drop of a hat. Although he was young, his strength was enough to shock even him. He was afraid that with his young age, if he were to live in the imperial capital, it would be troublesome if he were to get into a quarrel or fight with someone in the future and take someone's life without saying a word. Uncle Ning, are you saying that we can't casually kill people? You asked with a smile. Her soft voice had a sweet smile, pure and lovely. Yes. Pan Ning nodded. No matter what happens, remember not to kill anyone. If someone dies, the consequences will be very serious. You understands. We are good children, we won't casually kill people. She smiled, her pair of beautiful eyes curved as she softly said. Pan Ning's mouth twitched when he heard this. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These 3 children were not ordinary children. In fact, he did not know whether it was right to bring them home. Would they cause any trouble for the Pan family? However, seeing that they were so young, if they were left alone, who knew what kind of trouble they would cause? Thus, it was better to have them by their side. Chapter 44-41. The 3 of them nodded seriously. In fact, they understood without him saying it. The carriage moved slowly until it turned into a quiet and secluded alley. After a while, it quieted down. Before they got off the carriage, they heard a child's excited voice. Daddy is back. Daddy is back. The 3 children in the carriage quietly lifted the curtain and looked out. They saw a 4 or 5-year-old boy running forward, followed by a beautiful woman and several servants. Pan Ning got off the carriage first and saw his son rushing over, so he picked him up. Son, come, let Daddy see if you've gained weight again. He smiled and picked up his son, pinching his chubby little face. He smiled and looked at the woman behind him, softly saying, Madam, I'm back. Husband. The beautiful woman smiled and came to his side, hurriedly calling, Ching, come down, your father is tired from the journey, how can you let him carry you again? Oh. The child responded and came down from his father's arms. With one hand held by his mother and the other hand holding his father, he excitedly said, Daddy, Daddy, let's go in quickly, I want to see the gift that Daddy bought for me. Wait a moment. Pan Ning smiled and touched his son's head. Then he looked at the still carriage, walked forward, lifted the curtain and smiled, Come down quickly. The beautiful woman held her son's hand and looked at the carriage in surprise. She saw a little boy walk out first and jump off the carriage by himself. Then, he turned around and carried a little girl who looked less than 3 years old out of the carriage. Immediately after, a little boy who looked exactly the same as the little girl also got off the carriage by himself. Seeing the 3 children standing beside her husband, she couldn't help but be startled. She didn't know what to think, but her face turned pale and her body swayed slightly. Husband, they are. The woman asked, looking at Pan Ning with her beautiful eyes. Pan Ning saw her expression and knew that she was thinking too much. He smiled and came to her side. He held her waist and supported her, saying, Madam, don't think too much. This is not the place to talk. Let's go in and talk. Pan Ning's son didn't understand his mother's strange behavior. He was curiously looking at the 3 people in front of him with his eyes wide open. His gaze moved from Hao, to the 2 children who were younger than him but looked exactly the same. His face was full of curiosity. Let's go. Let me introduce you to the people in the mansion. Pan Ning looked at the 3 children and led them in. The servants in the mansion had already gone to inform the Pan family. Soon, the old master of the Pan family and the others knew that Pan Ning had returned with 3 children. Therefore, they all came to the front hall. Big brother, why are you home today? Is father here too? Pan Ning smiled and asked when he saw his elder brother walking out. Chapter 44-42. What surprised him even more was the noble aura that these 3 children exuded, which shocked him even more. He was an important official in the court and had seen all kinds of people. However, even the princes and princesses in the palace could not compare to these 3 little children. The twins were still young. The little girl had a pair of pure and beautiful eyes, pure and cute. The little boy, on the other hand, had the look of an adult. His little face was taut, and his eyes were filled with scrutiny and inquiry. There was also the older boy, who looked to be about 8 or 9 years old, but his aura had already formed. It was like a sharp sword, fierce and intimidating. His aura was slightly cold, and his little face was cold and sharp. At this moment, he was also staring at him. While he was sizing him up, he was also sizing him up. After all, he was in a high position, and the aura he emitted was intimidating. Even an adult wouldn't dare to stare at him and size him up like this. However, these 3 children weren't alarmed, didn't panic, and actually dared to stare at him and size him up without batting an eyelid. This caused him to see them in a new light. I am on leave today. Father has just returned. He knows that you are home and will probably come over, he said as he withdrew his gaze from the 3 children. That's good. I brought these 3 children back. I can tell them and let them get to know each other. In the future, these 3 children will live in our house, Pan Ning said with a smile. He said to the madam beside him, bring the children in first. Let the servants prepare some pastries for them to eat first. Okay. The beautiful madam replied softly. After bowing slightly, she held her son's hand. Looking at the 3 children, she said gently, come in with me. Go to the front hall and rest. Seeing that the children were taken away, Pan Hong asked, what's going on? It's a long story. Oh, grandfather is here. Pan Ning saw the familiar figure slowly walking over. He could not help but smile and quickly went forward to support him. Grandfather, you are well informed. You know as soon as I enter the house. Pan Ning glanced at him and said, I heard that you brought 3 children back. That's why I wanted to come and see what's going on. He paused for a moment before continuing, don't tell me you've done something to betray Chiu-yi? Hearing this, Pan Ning was stunned, then laughed out loud, Grandfather, it's not like you don't know what kind of person I am. Besides, Chiu-yi and I are deeply in love, how could I do that kind of thing? This matter is really not what you think. He smiled and shook his head. He didn't expect his family to misunderstand. However, he didn't say anything else. He only said, I met these 3 children when I came back. They were separated from their family and couldn't remember where their home was, so I brought them back and temporarily let them stay in our house. This excuse isn't very clever, it's full of loopholes. The Pan family's eldest young master, Pan Hong, glanced at him indifferently, obviously not believing his words. The old man also glanced at him and didn't say anything. That glance clearly showed that he didn't want him to come up with any excuses to brush them off. Pan Ning smiled embarrassedly. At this moment, he saw his father coming. He immediately bowed and greeted, Father. Chapter 44-43. He, I'll tell you in detail when we get to the backyard. Let's go in first and introduce you to the 3 children. They'll be living in our house from now on. Pan Ning said and gestured for them to go in first. The 3 of them looked at each other and walked in. Pan Old Man and Pan Hong, who had arrived first and met the 3 children, walked in slowly and sat down at the front. Then, their gazes fell on the 3 children. Pan Old Man entered and saw the 3 children. His expression was the same as the previous 2, with surprise and surprise. It seemed that he didn't expect that the 3 children brought back by his youngest son would be like this. He glanced at the 3 people sitting upright and glanced at his youngest son before sitting down at the front. Grandfather, father, eldest brother, madam, let me introduce you. Pan Ning stood in the middle of the hall with a smile and said to the people sitting there, these 3 children are siblings. This is the eldest brother, Xianyuan Hao, this is Xianyuan Mu Qin, and this is Xianyuan Mu Yu. As he spoke, his voice paused, and he turned sideways to introduce the 3 children. This is my grandfather, this is my father, this is my eldest brother, and this is my wife. Everyone in my family is here, except for my sister-in-law, who brought the 2 children back to her mother's house for a short stay and hasn't returned yet. Hearing this, the 3 children got down from their chairs and bowed to them in a well-behaved manner. They said in unison, "Greetings, great-grandfather Pan, grandfather Pan, Uncle Pan, Aunt Xiao." Pan Ning told them to address them on the way, so the three children greeted them according to his instructions. The people sitting there saw that the three children were so well-behaved and nodded with a smile on their faces. Pan family's ancestor saw that the twins were so well-behaved even though they were so young. He liked them and his face softened a little. He said to the three of them, "Pan Ning has already told us that from today onwards, you can stay here. Just treat this place like your own home. And, since you're here, don't be shy and stay here at ease." Pan Old Man nodded and said. Pan Hong looked at the three children and paused for a moment. He said, "If you lack anything or need anything, just tell Pan Ning and he will arrange it for you." "Yes." The three children replied. "Oh right, this is my son, Pan Bo Ching. You can play with him in the future." Pan Ning came to his son's side and touched his head. He asked with a smile, "Daddy brought you a little friend, are you happy?" Yes, I'm happy. My little brother and sister are so cute." The silly little boy grinned. He looked at Hao and said, "Big brother is good-looking too." However, he looked cold. He didn't dare to look at him. Hearing this, Pan Ning couldn't help but chuckle and pinch his son's little face. Hearing this, some of the elders of the Pan family looked at Pan Ning while others drank their tea. However, they all listened attentively to see how he would arrange things and... Chapter 44-44. After all, the South Courtyard was the best courtyard in the Pan family. Usually, even if they received ordinary guests, they would not be arranged to stay in the South Courtyard. Only when they received important guests would they be arranged to stay in the South Courtyard. Who would have thought that Pan Ning would arrange the South Courtyard for three children to stay in today? It was really surprising, but it also made them even more curious. Who exactly were these three children? Old Master Pan glanced at Pan Ning, coughed lightly, and said, "Chiu Yi, bring the children to familiarize themselves with the residence's environment. Then, see what they need to add and arrange it for them." "Okay." Second Madame Pan responded. After bowing, she held her son's hand and said to Hao, and the other two warmly, "The three of you, come with me. I'll bring you to see the courtyard." The three of them responded and bowed to the few people in the hall in a regular manner. Only then did they leave the hall. After they left, only the Pan family father and son were left in the hall. Looking at the people sitting upright, Pan Ning could not help but smile bitterly. He originally wanted to tell them in detail in the backyard, but it seemed that they had a lot to ask him. "Tell us in detail. What exactly is going on?" Old Master Pan picked up his teacup and took a sip of tea. He said slowly, "Don't try to trick us. Whether it's the truth or not, we'll know once we hear it." Pan Ning smiled helplessly and walked to the side to sit down. He said, "Grandfather, how would I dare to trick you? It's just that it's a long story." "Then take your time. We happen to have time today," Father Pan said and picked up his teacup. He looked like he was ready for a long chat. Seeing this, Pan Ning sighed silently and said, "I really don't know where to start." Hearing this, Pan Hong asked, "Who are they? Where did you know them?" Pan Ning glanced at his elder brother, waved his hands, and said with a smile, "You might not believe me if I tell you. I really don't know who they are, but I can tell you the last question. I met them in East City." However, when the three old foxes heard this, they could tell that there was a problem. What he said was that he could answer the last question. This was interesting. It seemed that he knew who these three children were, but he just didn't want to tell them. The three of them looked at each other, then looked away at the same time. Pan Ning drank his tea and did not notice the gazes of his grandfather, father, and brother. What about their families? Why didn't they go home? On the other hand, why did you bring them to your home? What's the reason? Pan Hong asked again. With Pan Hong asking questions, the two elders also drank their tea and listened from the side. They're looking for it too, but they're injured and hurt their heads. They can't remember where their house is. As Pan Ning spoke, he put down the teacup and looked at the three of them, saying, "These three children don't have any elders accompanying them to protect them. As you can see, the three of them don't look like children from ordinary families. Wherever they go, they will attract the attention of everyone." Chapter 44-45. Hearing his words, the three of them fell silent. That's right, from their point of view, they could naturally see that the three children were of extraordinary birth. They were definitely not children of ordinary families. However, to bring the three children back just like that, it seemed like, Pan Ning's father looked at him and said, "You know that raising three more children is not a big deal to our Pan family. However, what we are worried about is the identity and background of these three children. That is the most important thing. I don't know about their identity and background, but I know that they must be of extraordinary birth. That's why I want to help them when they are in trouble." Pan Ning looked at them with a serious and solemn expression and said, "Grandfather, father, eldest brother, there are some things that I can't tell you. However, please believe me, I know what I am doing." Hearing this, the three of them did not ask any more questions and only nodded. "Since you have said so, we won't ask any more questions. We also believe that you know what you are doing." Seeing that they did not ask any more questions, Pan Ning sighed in relief and said, "They will stay at home. I think that we will treat them as distant relatives. Moreover, I think that the three children will study with Qing, and the others under grandfather." Old man Pan stroked his beard and nodded, saying, "Teaching one is still teaching, teaching a few more is still teaching. Those children seem to be very likable, so let them study with us." "Thank you, grandfather." Pan Ning hurriedly stood up and thanked him. Old man Pan smiled and said, "We are all family. There is no need to be so formal." He stood up and said, "All right, I have to go back first. You see when they can bring Qing over." "Yes." Pan Ning replied with a smile. "I still have some things to deal with. You will have to take care of the three children." Pan Ning's father said and left. Pan Hung walked to his side and patted him on the shoulder, saying, "I have to pick up your sister-in-law and the children in a while. I will leave first." After watching them leave, Pan Ning stepped out of the hall and looked at the sky outside. His heart trembled slightly. The world was so mysterious. If he did not see it with his own eyes, how would he know that there were immortals in this world? If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, how could he have believed that the three young children could be so calm and meticulous in dealing with matters? It was just that he didn't know who their parents were. To be able to raise such outstanding children. When the three children stayed in the residence, they told the servants that they were the young master and young miss of the Pan family. Because of the Pan family's rules, the servants treated them with respect and didn't dare to be impudent. At night, Hao stood in the courtyard and looked at this elegant and quiet courtyard. No one knew what he was thinking. Mu Chen and Mu Yu walked out and saw him standing in the courtyard. They walked over and asked, "Brother, why are you standing here?" Hao looked at the two little ones and a smile appeared on his cold little face. "No, I was just thinking about something." He led the two of them inside and said, "The wind is strong at night. Don't catch a cold. Sleep early tonight. Uncle Ning said that tomorrow he will take us to the city to play." Yu said while beaming with smiles. In the room, Hao looked at them and asked, "What do you think of Uncle Ning?" Chapter 44-46. Hearing this, Hao held their hands and said seriously, "You two have to remember that although Uncle Ning is very good to us, you can't tell him our secret. Do you understand?" Mu Chen nodded and said, "I know." Yu beamingly smiled, and just like a little fox, she also nodded her head. Yu also knows. Big Brother had told us before, we must guard against people, Yu remembers. Yes, you can't be unguarded, but you can't have the heart to harm others. How smiled and taught again. Yes, you remembers. The little one nodded with a smile. You can't take out the things in the space casually. You don't have to let others know. We have the space. You can't even tell Uncle Ning. You can't tell anyone about the cultivation method and martial arts that Big Brother taught you. He reminded them again. Yes. The two little guys nodded and listened carefully. Well, you two are tired. Go to bed early today. He acted like a little adult. He touched the two little guys' heads and let them go to bed first. Then Big Brother should go to bed early too. The two said. Okay. How watched them take off their clothes and go to bed. He helped them pull up the quilt and then turned outside and went to the room next door. Because they had to cultivate, there couldn't be too many servants walking around in the courtyard. Therefore, when they wanted to arrange for servants to come over and take care of them today, he refused. When he returned to the room, he didn't go to bed directly. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the bed and cultivated. He was the big brother. He was older than his younger siblings. Moreover, he remembered many things. However, there were some things he didn't tell the two little ones. There were no cultivators on this continent. In fact, he was afraid. He was afraid that his parents wouldn't be able to find this place, and he was also afraid that they wouldn't be able to go back. Fortunately, he knew the cultivation method and there were many cultivation books in the space. Therefore, he could only work hard to cultivate, hoping to become stronger so that he could find the way back with his younger siblings. The next morning, Pan Ning took the children out of the house in a carriage. Compared to the three children who sat in a regular distance, her children were like naughty children. Even when they sat in the carriage, they would not stop moving. The little boy rolled his eyes, and looking at you, who was sitting properly, he couldn't help but move towards her side, and asked with a beaming smile, "Younger sister you, I am also Big Brother, do you want to call me Big Brother?" You, blinked her beautiful eyes and looked at the little brother who was older than her. After thinking for a bit, she sweetly called out, "Big Brother Fu Qing." Hearing that soft and sweet voice calling him Big Brother Fu Qing, the little boy jumped up in excitement. I'm a big brother too. I'm a big brother now. The little boy was very happy. He looked at Mu Chen expectantly and asked, "Brother Mu Chen, do you want to call me Big Brother?" Mu Chen glanced at him and looked away. No. Why? I'm obviously older than you. He scratched his head and looked at him with a puzzled expression. If you don't want it, then don't. Mu Chen was also a little arrogant. Seeing this, Fu Qing thought for a bit and took out a candy from his pocket. Call me Big Brother, and I'll give you candy. I don't want it. Mu Chen glanced at her and then looked away. Chapter 44-47. When Pan Buqing saw that his father had asked him to sit down, he obediently ran to his side and leaned against him while looking at Mu Chen with his pair of eyes. Pan Ning first brought them to the city for breakfast, then took them out for a stroll around the city. He also brought the children back to buy some things. They only returned to the Pan residence in the evening. After sending the three children back to the southern courtyard, Pan Ning paused and said, It's not convenient for you to have no servants here. How about this? I'll call 17 over to follow you. He then added, 17 is the secret guard who followed me to the courtyard to look for you that day. Hao thought for a moment and nodded. Okay. You guys should rest early today. Study with Qing tomorrow. Pan Ning smiled and said, as for other matters, you don't have to worry about them. I'll help you find out. Thank you. Hao bowed to him. Pan Ning nodded and then left first. The three children entered the room. Not long after, they heard a voice from outside. Young Master Hao, I'm here to report. A young man in ordinary green stood in the courtyard and reported. The door opened and the three children walked out. Hao looked at the man in the courtyard and asked, "Did Uncle Ning tell you everything?" "Yes, young Master Hao. From today onwards, 17 will serve the two young masters and young mistress and listen to their orders," he said respectfully. Hao glanced at him and didn't say much. He just told him the rules. "If you stay here, you have to abide by my rules. Without our permission, no one is allowed to enter the courtyard. In addition, you can wait outside the courtyard. If there's anything, we'll call for you." "Yes," he replied respectfully. "You may leave," Hao said. Thus, after bowing, 17 left the room. At night, the three children did not go to bed early. Instead, under Hao's guidance, they sat cross-legged on the bed to cultivate. 17, who was guarding outside the courtyard, looked at the room with the lights on. His eyes flashed, and he could not help but think of what the second young master had told him in the evening. Second young master had instructed him to stay by their side and take care of them. He had also instructed him to do more and speak less. In the southern courtyard, no matter what the three children did or said, he had to keep an eye on them. However, he was not to speak of it to outsiders. Even if the masters of the Pan family asked, he was not to say much. Thinking of the second young master's instructions, he also knew that these three children had an extraordinary background. Naturally, he did not dare to be careless. In the room, Hao, who was cultivating with the two little ones, slowly opened his eyes in the middle of the night. He looked at the two little ones and called out softly, "Chen, you, When the two of them heard his voice, they opened their eyes and looked at him. The moment they opened their eyes, there was clarity in their eyes instead of confusion and sleepiness. "Big brother, what's wrong?" You asked while looking at him with her pair of beautiful big eyes. Chapter 44-48. Okay. The two nodded. You smiled and said, "Big brother, if you can't wake up tomorrow, you must wake us up." Hao smiled and patted her head. I will. You can sleep at ease. It doesn't matter if you forget to wake up tomorrow. I'll wake you up. You answered happily and yawned. She was a little sleepy. Let's sleep early, Hao said and left after letting them lie down. The next morning, before the sky was bright, Hao woke up Mu Chen and Mu Yu. The three of them practiced boxing in the courtyard. Compared to Hao's punches, Mu Chen and Mu Yu's punches were weak. However, they were still young, so Hao didn't have high requirements for them. He only let them practice until they were familiar with it. As for the rest, he would talk about it later. After sweating profusely and bathing, the three children ate breakfast and were about to go out when they saw the dignified Pan Buching trotting towards them. "Big brother Hao, little brother Chen, little sister Yu, I'm here to take you to school." The little guy bounced over, followed by a boy and a girl who were 2 or 3 years older than him. The girl was about 6 or 7 years old, and the boy seemed to be the same age as Hao. The two walked over and looked at the three with curiosity in their eyes. "Brother Qin, are they the 3 people my father was talking about?" asked the boy. He walked up and looked at Hao, and the others. It's them. This is. Pan Buching was about to speak but was interrupted by the boy. "I'm Pan Bowen, and this is my sister, Pan Shua. My father is the eldest son of the Pan family. When we came back yesterday, my father already mentioned you," he said with a smile. "You're Xianyuan Hao. You two are twins, Xianyuan Mu Chen and Xianyuan Mu Yu. Big brother Bowen, big sister Shua, you can call me Yu. The little one showed a sweet smile and looked at the two of them obediently. This is for you." The little girl with red face took out a wooden doll and handed it over to Yu. She seemed to be somewhat shy, and spoke in a low voice, but when she heard Yu, calling her big sister Shua, her Her pair of eyes flashed, and she was very happy. Yu's eyes lit up, and taking the gift she handed over, she said with a smile, "Thank you, big sister Shua. I also have gifts for you." Pan Bowen looked at Hao and Shen and said. He took out 2 small rectangular boxes from his arms and handed them to them. "These are 2 brushes. Daddy bought them with me yesterday. They are for you." "Thank you." Hao and Mu-chin took it and thanked him. "Let's go to school. If you're late, great-grandpa will slap you," Pan Bowen said as he and Pan Buching led them to the school. The little girl with a red face shyly held Yu's hand. Seeing Yu smiling, she couldn't help but smile as well, and even her footsteps became lighter. When the children arrived at the school, Shua originally wanted to sit with Yu but when she saw Mu-chin, who looked exactly like Yu but had a sullen face, sitting next to Yu she could only find a seat herself. Chapter 44-49. The old man walked in slowly with his hands behind his back. He glanced at the children who were sitting up straight in an orderly manner, then coughed lightly and asked, "Do you all know each other?" "Yes," the children answered. The old man then walked down and said to Bowen, who was sitting on the left in front, "Write down the book I asked you to memorize last time today." "Yes, great-grandfather," Bowen answered in an orderly manner. He did not look back but began to grind the ink and write from memory. "Shua, this is the writing you have to practice today." The old man gave her homework and walked over to Bo Ching. "Practice your writing today. The homework is here." After giving the 3 children their homework, he walked over to Hao and the other 2 and asked, "Have you learned it before? What do you know?" Hao thought for a moment and said, "I don't really remember, but I remember that father and mother taught me before." Hearing this, the old man paused for a moment and asked, "Then do the 3 of you know how to write your names?" "Yes," the 3 of them said in unison. "Write it down and let me see." He pulled over a chair and sat between the 3 of them. He saw the 3 children pick up the brush, dip it in some ink, and seriously write down their names on the paper. Then, they handed it over one by one for him to see. Looking at the 3 names written by the 3 children, he looked at the 3 of them with some surprise. Hao's handwriting had already begun to show its edge, and although the 2 younger ones wrote stroke by stroke, it was still regular and neat. It did not seem like the handwriting that they would write at their age. After all, they were such young children. However, when he thought of the unique temperament of these 3 children, he felt that it was not surprising. Your writing is not bad. Today, I'll test you first and see what you know." He looked at the 3 children, thought for a moment, and tested them one by one. However, what he did not expect was that this school exam was full of surprises. The 3 children knew more than he expected, especially Hao, who could memorize a book he had never read. His photographic memory really shocked him. Of course, Old Man Pan would never have guessed that it was because Hao was an immortal. His spiritual power was not something a mortal could compare to. Moreover, he had been intelligent since he was young, so he could learn twice the result with half the effort. After a whole morning, Old Man Pan couldn't help but feel a sense of appreciation for talent. He discovered that not only Hao, but even the 2 children who weren't even 3 years old had extremely good memories. They understood with just a hint, and their comprehension abilities were even more astonishing. "That's all for today, you can go back. Do your homework well. I'll check on you one by one tomorrow." The old man told them to go back first. The next few days passed as usual. However, Hao learned things extremely quickly. Even Bo Wen could not catch up to his speed. Moreover, not only did he learn to read and write, but he also learned to paint. On this day, after the old man left school, he walked slowly to the front and met Pan Hong. After Pan Hong bowed, he asked, "Why haven't I seen Pan Ning recently? What has he been busy with these days?" Chapter 44-50. Hearing this, the old man frowned. What's he doing there? I don't know. Pan Hong paused, then asked, Grandfather, how are and the others doing? Grandfather Pan glanced at him. They're naturally intelligent and have a photographic memory. They can be called demonic geniuses. Pan Hong's eyes flashed. All 3 children are like that? Yes. The old man nodded and sighed. An ordinary family wouldn't be able to raise such an outstanding child. I really don't know who they are. I'm getting more and more curious. Pan Hong smiled and said, Perhaps, we will find out one day. To be honest, he was also curious about the origins of the 3 children. However, they were brought back by his brother. Even if he was curious, he didn't think of investigating in secret. After all, he believed that his brother had a sense of propriety. When it was time to let them know, they would know. Yes, I heard from your father yesterday that His Majesty seems to want to send you on a long trip? Grandfather Pan asked. There was talk of it, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. If you have to go on a long trip, you have to arrange for people to follow you. Safety is the most important thing. He patted him on the shoulder and said, I'll go back and rest first. If you encounter something you can't solve, discuss it with your family. Grandfather, don't worry. I will. Pan Hong said and watched him leave before heading to the backyard. The days passed unknowingly. In the blink of an eye, and the others had been in the Pan family for more than 3 months. Compared to Mu Chen and Mu Yu, Er's cultivation improved faster. However, in this place, the spiritual energy was scarce. Although there were pills to improve strength in the space, he didn't dare to use them casually. Early in the morning, the Pan family was sitting in a circle eating breakfast. It was peaceful and quiet. However, they were caught off guard by a sudden piece of news. Not good, not good. Old master, something happened to first young master. The steward hurried in to report. Behind him, 2 secret guards covered in blood carried the bloodied Pan family's first young master, Pan Hong. Grandfather Pan, who was eating breakfast, stood up abruptly when he heard the housekeeper's report. The bowl in his hand fell to the ground. His heart pounded. What happened? What happened? However, as soon as he finished speaking, he saw his eldest grandson being carried by the secret guard. He felt his blood rush to his head and his entire body swayed. He almost lost his balance. Husband. Father. Father. The expressions of Pan Hong's wife and child changed abruptly, and they hurriedly ran forward. However, when they saw the wounds on his body and the blood all over his body, tears fell from their eyes. How could this be? How could this be? Husband. Hong. Pan Fu helped old Master Pan to the front. When he saw Pan Hong covered in injuries, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Quickly get a doctor. Quick. Pan Ning woke up late today and didn't have breakfast with them, but after hearing the news of his big brother's accident, he quickly rushed over. As for Mu Chen and Mu Yu, who were in the southern courtyard, they were used to eating by themselves, so they didn't know what had happened earlier. The servants of the Pan residence also didn't tell them about the eldest young master's accident. After all, in everyone's eyes, they were just 3 children. Chapter 44-51. Seeing the doctor shaking his head as he walked out, Old Man Pan's entire body swayed and his vision turned black. He fainted. Father. Old Man Pan was shocked and quickly supported him while shouting, Doctor. Doctor, quickly take a look at my grandfather. Pan Ning quickly walked out and pulled the doctor who had just walked out of the room. The doctor sighed in his heart and returned to check Old Man Pan's pulse. He then took out some medicine and placed it under Old Man Pan's nose for him to smell. He then pressed on Old Man Pan's Renjong point and said, Old Master is fine. He just fainted from the shock. He's getting on in years, so you should send him back to rest first. Is there really no hope for Hung, er? Doctor, you must save him. You must save him. Old man Pan woke up and held the doctor's hand as he pleaded. Sigh. Eldest young master's lungs have been injured, and he has lost too much blood. Not only that, but the tendons in his legs have also been severed. This person is trying to kill him. With such serious injuries, this old man is really powerless. The doctor sighed and withdrew his hand. He cupped his hands towards them and turned to walk out. Hearing the doctor's words, the Pan family's faces turned pale with grief and sorrow. Pan Hong's wife covered her mouth and sobbed beside the bed. How could this be? How could this be? Old man Pan sat down and muttered in disbelief. Pan Ning clenched his fists and refused to give up. I'll go to the city to find other doctors. Father, immediately go to the palace to explain the situation to the emperor and ask for an imperial doctor to treat Big Brother. Yes. I'll go to the palace to ask for an imperial doctor immediately. Old man Pan heard Pan Ning's words and recovered from the shock. He quickly stood up and walked out. I'll go to the palace to ask for an imperial doctor immediately. Madam, please send grandfather back to the courtyard to rest. Pan Ning looked at his wife and said. No, I want to stay here. I'm not leaving. Old man Pan said, unwilling to leave. He was worried that if he left, he wouldn't be able to see his grandson for the last time. I'll stay here and take care of him. If all of you go out, someone will have to look after him. Pan Ning's wife said softly. All right, then I'll leave the manor to you. I'll go out now. As for sister-in-law, you. Pan Ning gestured and looked at his sister-in-law who was sobbing in the inner room. You go. I'll stay here. She said as she watched him leave. She poured a cup of water for the old man and went into the inner room. She crouched down and hugged her, comforting her. How? Who was it that did this? Pan, old Pan they. Of course, the children of the Pan family were also sensible. Although they were brought back to the courtyard, they didn't say a single word, but tears continuously fell from their eyes. Pan Bo Ching, who was usually the most mischievous, saw Bowen and Shue crying silently. He couldn't help but wipe his tears. He pursed his lips and said, Big brother, little sister, don't cry. My father and grandfather have already gone to find a doctor. Uncle will be fine. Chapter 44-52. Sister, don't cry, don't cry. Fu Qing did not know how to coax people. Seeing her crying more and more sadly, and his elder brother also had his head lowered, he could not help but cry as well. He wiped his tears and ran out. Hao and the other two were still in the courtyard and had not been discharged. In addition, the south courtyard was rather secluded. The servants in the front were moving about chaotically, but the south courtyard was still quiet and elegant. 17 was waiting outside. Because he had heard the news from the other secret guards, he was also anxious and worried at this time. How was the eldest master now? Just as he was thinking, he saw Fu Qing crying and wiping his tears as he walked over. He quickly went forward and called out, Master Qing, what's wrong with you? Fu Qing glanced at him and ignored him. He continued to cry as he walked towards the south courtyard. Seeing this, 17 hurriedly came to the entrance of the southern courtyard and said, Young Master Hao, young Master Qing is here. Sob sob, sob sob. Fu Qing walked in as he cried. He stood in front of the three people and could not stop crying. In the courtyard, Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu could not help but look at each other. Yu, could not help but ask, Brother Fu Qing, why are you crying? Did Uncle Ning hit you? Sob sob. No, sob sob. Fu Qing sobbed as he cried. Then what's wrong with you? Mu Chen asked. He really could not bear to see this boy, who was a head taller than him, crying non-stop. Sob sob. My uncle is going to, sob sob. He's going to die, sob 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 that he said intermittently, sob sob. I told big brother and little sister that uncle will be fine, but uncle has a lot of blood on his body, and he won't wake up. The servants in the residence are all saying that uncle is going to die, sob sob sob. I don't want uncle to die, I don't want uncle to die, sob sob. Hearing this, Mu Chen and Mu Yu were stunned. Uncle Hong, who had a cold face but would send them things, was going to die. Hao frowned as his cold little face darkened. He looked at 17, who was standing at the side, and asked, "What happened?" Eldest young master was ambushed on his way back. The bodyguards accompanying him were all killed. The secret guards tried their best to save him, but I heard that his injuries were very serious. The doctor said that he might not live past tonight. 17 quickly told him what he knew. Hearing this, Hao was silent and didn't say anything. No one knew what he was thinking. Boo-hoo. Big brother and little sister kept crying. I'm scared too. Boo-hoo. Fu Qing sobbed softly. Big brother Bo Qing, don't cry, Uncle Hong will be fine. Yu tiptoed and lightly patted his head. Chen Yu Hao looked at the two of them. Go and accompany Bowen and Where's big brother? Mu Chen looked at him and asked. Hao thought about it and said, I'll go take a look at Uncle Hong. Okay. Mu Chen nodded and said to Bo Qing, don't cry. Boys shouldn't cry. 17, bring them over. Hao looked at 17 and ordered. Yes. 17 responded and left with the three little ones. Chapter 44-53. Hao Pan Ning was a little surprised to see him here. However, he was in a hurry to bring the doctors to treat his elder brother, so he did not stop walking. As he walked forward, he said, something happened in the residence. If you need anything, look for 17 first. Hao followed beside him and said, I heard that something happened to Uncle Hong, so I wanted to come and take a look. Elder brother was ambushed on the way back. His condition is not good. I'm bringing the doctors to treat him now. As Pan Ning spoke, his footsteps were hurried. He said to the dozen or so doctors who were jogging behind him, everyone, please walk faster. The doctors behind him were in a hurry and were panting slightly. One of the fatter ones was sweating a lot. He was wiping his sweat and panting as he jogged to follow the crowd. When they arrived at the courtyard, before they could catch their breath, they were invited in for a diagnosis. However, after entering, they all came out shaking their heads. There are too many injuries and they have hurt his lungs. Forgive us for not being able to do anything. As they spoke, they did not dare to ask for a consultation fee and left on their own. The dozen or so doctors came quickly and left quickly. Pan Ning did not even have the strength to stop them as he watched them leave. He looked at his elder brother on the bed and stood there in a daze. His eyes could not help but redden. Outside, Hao listened to the doctor's words and was silent for a while. Just as he was about to walk in, he saw Pan Ning's father hurrying over with two old men. He retreated to the side and watched them enter before following in. I've brought 2 imperial doctors. Quick, please save my eldest son. Pan Ning's father hurriedly said and pulled the 2 imperial doctors forward. Let us catch our breath first. The 2 old men who were pulled in hurriedly were out of breath. After they steadied themselves, they took a few deep breaths before looking at the person on the bed. They were no strangers to Pan Hong. However, when they saw Pan Hong lying on the bed with a pale face and an extremely weak breath, the 2 imperial doctors looked at each other and sighed in their hearts. With just one look, they knew that young Master Pan was most likely doomed. Even so, the 2 of them did not say much. They just went forward and seriously checked his pulse. The members of the Pan family watched from behind with their hearts in their mouths. Due to their nervousness, their palms were sweating. More than 10 of the best physicians in the city had come, and all of them had said that there was no hope. Now, they could only place their hopes on these 2 imperial physicians. If even they couldn't do anything about it, then it was really. How saw that the old master was so nervous that his body was trembling. The others were also worried. They looked at the 2 imperial physicians with nervous and hopeful gazes. He pursed his lips and looked away. In his memory, his mother had taught him some simple medical skills. In addition, he could feel that Pan Hong's aura was extremely weak from the moment he came in. His face was also faintly covered with a layer of death aura. A mortal's aura was so weak that he could die at any time. If there was no divine medicine, it could be said that he was dead for sure. He had life-saving medicinal pills in his space. However, if a person who had been sentenced to death survived because of his medicinal pills, he thought that there would be a lot of trouble in the future. Moreover, if they knew that he had a life-saving pill, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't become greedy. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.